Hi, this video is about what I call numerical ontology, which is an approach that I am developing to ontology, the study of fundamental reality, that is based on the study of number. So you could conceive of this as a extension of Occam's razor. Occam's razor says that we should not multiply objects unnecessarily or multiply entities unnecessarily. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, we should aim towards a simple theory that starts with the least number of objects, and then we can build up in complexity. So the basic idea is that everything comes from the smallest numbers. We could think of it that way, as like starting with the smallest numbers, and then all the rest of the numbers are manifestations of the smallest numbers. So one is a manifestation of zero, um, two is a manifestation of one. In that sort of way that you could build up in that way. So why take this approach? So I don't really believe in the objectivist project of like establishing truth out there. Like, okay, we know what's absolutely true out there. I think that that can be useful, like in science, and that you can do a lot with it. But if you really want to understand what is fundamentally real, I don't think you're going to get at it through treating reality as out there, because it promotes a dualism between subject and object. The fact is, there's no separation between reality as it is and the way that you perceive it and the way your brain constructs that information. Like you can't actually escape that relationship. So it's as important to understand the way your brain is interpreting your experiences as it is to understand what the experiences are out there, because technically you can never get to what's out there without the mediation of your mind. So this is sort of similar to Kant's approach, which is study the way the mind works and you'll understand reality. Um, as opposed to studying reality out there and then thinking that it will explain how the mind works. I think that one approach is better than the other, that the mental approach is more useful. So that's what I take that view. It's sort of a rationalist view as opposed to an empiricist view. But I'm not saying that this defines reality out there. I'm saying that what's really relevant is the way that you think about reality. That that's really what's going on, and that what people are trying to solve with ontology is not actually what's out there. They're trying to reduce cognitive dissonance. So I have a therapeutic model, that the goal of ontology is to create psychological balance and equilibrium, without introducing a bunch of unfalsifiable claims or poorly supported claims about the fundamental nature of reality. Because in my honest experience, none of the ontological views that are like popular, like physicalism, or I'll consider theism to be an ontological view. I don't consider either of them to be very strong arguments, because they make huge leaps in logic to try to say, well, everything is like this, and you can't know everything because you haven't explored the whole universe. If you've explored the whole universe and seen all that there is out there, then I may listen to you on what is fundamentally real out there. But if you personally haven't like explored all that's out there, and if you personally, don't have you know, full perception of all causes and conditions, then I'm going to be real skeptical about your claims that you know what is objectively real on a fundamental level. So let's start just by breaking down, the numbers. So we start with zero. So zero in Western culture is often dismissed as irrelevant or nothing. And that's not necessarily the case in all cultures. Specifically in traditions like Taoism and Buddhism, there's this notion of Tao or sunyata meaning emptiness. And basically the idea is that reality can ultimately be thought in terms of this emptiness, which is equivalent to zero. What's interesting about that is that it lines up very much with the current state of physics. There's a concept in physics known as zero point energy. That is when we measure the vacuum, when we measure a vacuum, there's energy there, and much more energy than is predicted by theoretical models. Like, they don't know. It's called the cosmological constant problem. Like, it's somewhere between 60 and 120 orders of magnitude greater than predicted by these theories. So it's a lot of energy, enough to warp space-time. Like the energy in the vacuum is great. Not only that, but quantum field theory, the most successful applied theory of quantum mechanics, um, it treats particles and waves as perturbations of the quantum vacuum state. That is, its fluctuations in the void or in empty space. So empty space is not empty. They talk about virtual particles, which are unobservable. It's basically the idea is stuff is going on. And quantum physics itself is all about like infinite potential becoming actual. So D.T. Suzuki, the great Zen teacher and intellectual, he defined emptiness as infinite possibility. So that's the way I view zero, infinite possibility that's not yet manifest. So it hasn't become actual, it's potential, but potential is real. And that's kind of what we're wrestling with quantum physics is they know that these probability waves are not just mathematical probabilities. They know that they are real and they have real consequences, that they actually have effects. They're causal. So they are real. They're just not tangible in the way that we think of things. So everything comes from this emptiness of zero. So now moving from zero to one. So one is the wholeness of manifest reality. It's what you could say exists. But the interesting thing about one is how it relates to this concept of infinity. So I think infinity makes no sense if you think of it as an infinite string of rational real numbers, like 1 through a googolplex and beyond. Like it never ends, and you can't conceive of it. It makes zero sense, like conceptually. It's not an elegant or simple concept at all. However, it does become intelligible if you consider infinity to be infinite potential divisions of one. So if we've got one, you could, in theory, divide one an infinite number of times. So I think that's more what we're dealing with, because, the number infinity, it's like related to how many divisions you can make. It's limited to how many things you can observe. Like our highest numbers relate to the number of quantifications, the number of measurements we can make, the number of calculations we can do. So in a sense, it's a choice to divide the number one. And this relates to a problem in philosophy called the problem of the one and the many. And the idea is that we could conceive of reality and even objects in reality as one or many. So, like, is the universe one thing, or is it composed of many things? Is it both? Is it just like the sum total of parts, or is it, in a sense, a real thing that has emergent properties? And this whole emergence versus reductionism, holism versus reductionism is a topic for another video. But it relates to this concept of one and infinity. So the interesting thing is that, like, we treat objects in our life as having multiple numerical qualities. We don't perceive things as just being a certain numerical value. For instance, a pair of shoes. A pair of shoes is treated as one thing. It's a pair of shoes. But it's also two things. It's two shoes. So simultaneously it's 1 and 2. So we're used to actually this idea of number scaling, or reducibility versus complexity. So the interesting thing too is that in this theory, like any object that you treat as separate from the one unified reality is, in a sense, it's not completely real. And this hints at an intuition in many spiritual traditions about like the illusory nature of things. Is basically any division that you make of one will be 0 point something. That is, it won't be a whole number. It won't be a whole thing. It's only a part of thing. So a part of a thing. And so you cannot understand the full context of any object without understanding the whole universe as a whole. Carl Sagan famously said, if you wish to bake an apple pie from scratch, first you need the universe. He was referring to this exact idea of like, you cannot understand a thing without understanding the whole. Because a division is always some semi-arbitrary abstraction of something from its environment. If you think of me outside of the environment that created me, you're not going to understand me. You have to understand me in context. Everything's in context. So that's really the principle of 1. So now let's move on. 2. So I'm only going to go to the number 4, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to it because I'm really struggling to keep this video short. I've already recorded it several times trying to keep it down. So 2 is typically related to this idea of like dualism. It also could be complementary. It's relational. And I think dualism plagues us in Western culture. Mind versus matter, spirit versus, the physical world, or, God versus man. All these ideas that are just like these hard barriers that we put up. And the truth is everything is interconnected. So you can't ever say anything is completely separate. If two things interact, and philosophers have pointed this out for a long time, they must share some common link. They must be connected on some level. So that lends support towards this idea of 1 is that if two things can interact, they are not completely separate, but they represent two aspects. So the idea of 2 is that there are different aspects to things. And 2 also is the number of divisions. So it's you don't really want to build your ontology on the number 2, but 2 is important to understand. So now let's move up to 3, and hopefully I can get through this quickly. So 3, and I like to think of these in terms of geometric objects. So 0 is like the background. So like picture like Microsoft Paint, like it's just a blank background. That's what 0 is. It's the space in which everything happens. Then 1 could be thought of as like a sphere. Because it has no vertices. It is just completely whole. It's like a dot, but just like 3-dimensional. So a single point, 3-dimensional, the sphere. Then you've got the number 2. It's interesting. I sort of think the number 2 in 3 dimensions would manifest as some sort of cylinder, connecting 2 points. So picture the sphere of 1, and then inside the sphere you've got a cylinder that goes across the diameter from one side of the sphere to the other, and that effectively divides the sphere in half. It's the midway. It marks the middle point, and it also connects 2 opposite sides of the sphere. So it's this idea of division. And it's this idea of measurement between 2 aspects of the one. It's very fascinating. The number 3 can be represented in 3-dimensional geometry as a tetrahedron or a pyramid. So the interesting thing about that is that the pyramid, if you place it within the sphere, it provides directionality. And so I think it relates to time. The arrow of time, that there's a certain transformation path that reality takes. And so 3 is the number of transformation and creation. This relates to what's called the Hegelian dialect, which is thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that two opposites can be combined into a third combination of the two. And that is the way that change occurs. And that's been true to my experience is what you have to do is you have to transcend a duality of concepts and create a concept that somehow incorporates aspects of both, and that's the process of creation and change. So it's like a forward movement. And so to really understand the future and predict the future, what you have to understand is that the dynamic interplay between opposing forces and what sort of synthesis may emerge. So that's like 3. 3 is an amazing number. 4, and this is the last number I'll cover. I've gone over on my time of how long I wanted this video to be, but I just cannot simplify this anymore. Albert Einstein famously said, things should be explained as simply as possible, but no simpler. And that's how I feel in this video. I cannot make this video super short. So the number 4 could be expressed geometrically as a cube. So how does a cube relate to all this? A cube is like structure and form. I view the cube as like inertia, matter. Like the cube is stable, but it also has no directionality to it. You can't like it's not like the tetrahedron, the pyramid, which has a point and a direction. The cube does not, but the cube is incredibly stable. It is solid. So it's sort of like this is like the cube represents, and the number 4 represents the conservative impulse. I'm not just talking about politically, I'm talking about in terms of systems change, system development. Every system has progressive and conservative influences. A progressive influence is trying to change a system, and a conservative impulse is trying to keep it the same. So it's also like force versus inertia. So the number 3 and the pyramid, the tetrahedron, is like force, forward movement, whereas the cube is like inertia. It's sort of holding back, holding things together. And so you need both. And so that sort of rounds out sort of my numerical ontology in terms of the way that I see the numbers 0 through 4. And as I mentioned, like I could probably go farther with the other numbers, but I don't have an immediate intuitive sense of the numbers 5 and beyond. And to some degree, I don't feel like I have to, because I feel like just the numbers 0 through 4 are so rich in metaphor and understanding. So yeah, if you like this, please subscribe, consider subscribing, leave a comment, like, all that good stuff. And I'll try to respond to any comments. I plan on releasing a video around 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Saturdays, which is 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's my goal, is to be somewhat consistent with that. And yeah, and I plan on having most of my videos be a little bit shorter than this one, but I just couldn't simplify it any farther. So yeah, thank you for watching.